Why not reduce 80 of 80 items or marksman especially while adding 80 scalars to the passive so they're able to have a better feeling power spike late game and other classes don't abuse them? Well, it just depends on what the item's supposed to do. Most items aren't supposed to have a scaling power spike in the late game, right? Like, a lot of items are supposed to power spike when you buy them. And so by giving certain items ratios, you actually invert what they're supposed to be good at and supposed to help you with. And so we had this period of time where we put a bunch of scalars on a bunch of things. So we're like, oh, scalars feel good. But, like, something like Static Shiv, as an example, doesn't necessarily need an AD scalar to feel good. It can just do the right amount of damage and allow you to clear the wave, right? And then as the game progresses, you can rely on your auto attack scaling. That's another thing is, when in regards to AD items having AD scalars, one of the things you're competing against is, as I mentioned already, your character already has an AD scalar. It's their auto attack with attack speed and crit. And so by giving AD items AD scalars on them, there's potential to dilute that entire space as well. One of the things that we often have to do, as an example here, I'll bring up Viego to show you really quick. So it turns out that having decent auto attacks is incredibly powerful. And so often when we're making a character that attacks a lot, we have to like make their spells bad. An example of this is on Viego is when I was testing Viego, the damage on his spells was much higher because I was just like, well, of course this damage should be higher. It's so low. But as we continued to test Viego and realized that he was strong and, trying to find ways to nerf him during dev, a lot of the damage on his spells started disappearing. So the Q only does, a little bit of base damage. The W has no scaling whatsoever. It's purely base damage and 100% AP, which, Viego doesn't buy. E, no damage, of course. And the ultimate, its damage is actually not all that amazing, right, for an ult. And, there's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the reasons is that Viego auto-attacks you, and his auto-attacks are very powerful. And so in order to enable his auto-attacks to be powerful, he needed a lot less damage on his core spells to account for it. And so that's another thing. And it's like, sometimes people ask, why does Viego's W not scale? And that is, it can't. If Viego's W scaled, he would do too much damage. And so if we gave this a really strong AD ratio, we would probably need to go and say, well, where's that coming from? Maybe his Q does less damage, maybe he has less powerful auto attacks, things like that, right? And so Viego was this balancing act of where can I squeeze as much damage as the abilities into, where can I squeeze as much damage into the abilities as possible while still making him fair? And so one of the first things that was cut was his W, basically saying, okay, I can't let this scale. I need the power budget and damage somewhere else, and so made it magic damage. Now, of course, the W still gets to be good because it's a stun, but there's a reason it doesn't have all that good as scaling damage, and that's to make sure we have the space elsewhere. Yeah. Why is his R an auto? Because it's an auto. He hits you with his sword. It's an auto attack. Also, I wanted the R to proc the mist passive, not add it. Viego's Q as a passive, where every spell he hits you with, it puts mist on you, right? And I wanted in Viego's case, the ultimate's an execute, so I wanted to finish the pattern, which made it make a lot more sense for it to proc the mist on you as opposed to adding mist to you, because then it wouldn't be as sensical as an execute. And then the last thing is that I wanted as many places as I could in Viego's kit to give him on-hit effects. Because it turns out it actually can be kind of hard to get certain melee characters to buy on-hits. And I designed Viego around Blade of the Ruined King and Trinity Force. Those are the two items that primarily we were trying to get him to buy in testing. And so it felt fairly important that the guy had very strong auto on-hit synergy. And so his ultimate applies on-hit effects as an auto attack. His Q hits you twice when he autos. That's all there to ensure he buys those items. Is this why KAYLE's early game can't be strong? Because people want the player to scale? That is a question that's always about KAYLE, right? It's we could make KAYLE's early game stronger, but here's a question for KAYLE players. Would you like a strong early game and then when you get to the end game feel like you're not an omnipotent god? Or would you like a weaker endgame early game to guarantee that when you get to endgame you feel like you're an omnipotent god? And so that's like one of the constant trade-offs we have to think about with KAYLE is there's often a lot of changes we could do to make her stronger early game, but to some degree, if KAYLE's strong early game, she's not allowed to be strong late game. And so like as an example, right now, I have people coming in saying KAYLE sucks, and one of the things they keep saying when they say KAYLE sucks right now is she can't carry, she doesn't do any damage. Now, that's probably a little hyperbolic. I'm not sure that's actually true, like fully true, but like if it's true that KAYLE feels like she's not carrying and we were to buff her, should we buff her by making her early game better, or should we buff her by ensuring her scaling makes it feel like she's that crazy carry that KAYLE players are probably signing up for when they pick her, right? And that's the hard part, and the balance is there's lots of ways to buff a character, but certain ways to give a character more power budget are more in line with what their players are looking for. And that's the trick, is finding out the right ones. Not always easy. Yeah. Make lethal tempo give total attack speed? That would probably be not ideal, because it would like hard index into like being Jinx or being an AD carry that has like a high innate attack speed buff. Total attack speed multiplies your attack speed purchases and your innate buffs, right? And so total attack speed would basically like kind of like double down on it being an attack speed rune, versus percent attack speed just says, hey, this is similarly useful on really anybody who wants attack speed. So I don't know if lethal tempo is, as an example, is supposed to be significantly better on Jinx than it is on Vayne, which total attack speed would move it towards, because Jinx has a 130% attack speed buff and Vayne does not have one. So I think that's the complication there. I don't know if we want to double down on that scaling in that sense. Bring back Galeforce. So honestly, as one of Galeforce's original haters, when I say haters, I mean like I saw Galeforce in dev and I was like, that's not okay. 80 carries can't have a dash. As one of its haters originally, I actually love Galeforce and I think it's a cool item. I think it was just proved to me pretty quickly when I saw it on live that like, hey, actually this is totally balanced. If this feels like it can be totally balanced, just giving it the right cooldown. And so I personally am a Galeforce fan. The reason it was removed is the idea was if it's not a mythic, everybody will buy it. I'm not personally convinced that's true. Because the idea originally was, oh, if it's a mythic, then it trades off versus shield bow, trades off versus IE, or whatever other mythics you're having, right? And so we could balance Galeforce by saying the trade-off is you're losing out on all these other good items. But I'm not personally convinced that's true, that we couldn't also have the right trade-offs in the system as it stands now. But that's probably coming from a bias of I thought that item was pretty sweet, and I enjoyed it, so that was sweet. But yeah, it was removed mainly because there's a worry that if it was to stay in the game without the trade-off of being a mythic versus other mythics, just every AD carry would buy it most games if it was any good. Which, no, that might be the case. I wonder if that could be balanced though with its stat line and its and the right cooldown on the active though.